Okay. Hello, everybody. I am Nicole Powell. I'm the lead investigative agent for the Clearwater Council of Governments. Today, we are going to be going over an annual training for major unusual incidents. We have a PowerPoint that will be following along as we go through this training. Sorry, typically we do this live, so I know this will be very, very different. But welcome to 2021. Hopefully, it'll change soon. And I also want you to meet Courtney.
Hi, I'm Courtney Key. I am the investigative agent with the Clearwater COG, and I am going to be working with Nicole to get you some annual training.
Okay, so basically, as you guys know, this is an annual training. You have to do it within a calendar year. So just kind of make sure that, and we'll kind of go over that more at the end, but just want to kind of make sure that nobody's kind of panicking, that you do have a whole year in order to get this done. So basically, there's been really no changes with the rule. Oh, my light went off. Oh, well, there's been no changes with the rule. The rule came out in January 1st of 2019. So there has been no changes since. So we've been following this rule now for a good 2 years. And we will probably follow this rule for at least 5 years, because usually about every 5 years they make changes with rules. So basically, unusual incident is an alleged, suspected, or actual occurrence. If you would ever look up at the rule, those C16, C16B, all that stuff is where you would find the definitions that we'll go over later. Basically, we investigate MUIs because we want to effectively manage the incidences. We identify causes and contributing factors. Once we determine what those causes and contributing factors are, here in the COG, we send out an email to the team, basically saying, hey, this is what we have identified as the causes and contributing factors. And then we're requesting you guys to do a prevention plan that addresses those causes and contributing factors. And again, that prevention plan is done by the team. It's not done by Courtney or myself. So as a team, you guys have to kind of get together. We do offer any kind of assistance that we can. And also too, when we're sending out those causes and contributing factors, by all means, if you guys think that there might have been something else that could have contributed to it that you know of, like behind the scenes, because you guys know these individuals better than anybody else, please share that with us, because we want to make sure that we identify everything that we can to make sure that we come up with a very, very good prevention plan. And hopefully that's going to reduce incidences from occurring again. Again, the MUIs have always been in the categories A, B, and C. That hasn't changed. Depending on what category they are, there could be other entities involved regarding law enforcement, children's services, those types of things. Your category A's, nothing has changed as far as the categories with the rule. So you're looking at accidental or suspicious death, exploitation, failure to report, misappropriation, your neglect, physical abuse, prohibited sexual activities, rights code, and verbal and sexual abuse. And again, you need to remember that in these categories, it's very possible that children's services or law enforcement could be working with us or doing the investigation, and we accept that investigation. Category B's, attempted suicide, death, medical emergency, missing individual, your peer-to-peer acts, and your significant injuries. And then your category C's are law enforcement, unanticipated hospitalizations, and unapproved behavioral supports. And I want to remind you guys, some counties do have a form that they send out. We do not utilize that form in any of our COG counties. But basically, for some of those counties, you might get a form from the investigative agent to ask you to complete it. Basically, any kind of investigation that's done, we're going to reach out to you guys in some way, shoot an email, a phone call, just gathering that documentation and things like that is how we kind of do it with the COG. So definitions. And again, like I said, there's been no changes with the definitions. So I'm not going to kind of read these to you, hopefully, on every slide, because you guys can have access to this PowerPoint. I don't know how that will happen because of the training, but if you want to reach out to us, we can always send this to you so that you have it for your reference if you ever want to use it for your own benefit to do any kind of trainings, those types of things. So our emails will be at the end, and I'm sure Austin can always share that in another way with you guys, but they haven't changed either. So if you want them, just kind of, like I said, just reach out to us and we can send you this PowerPoint. One thing to remember about physical abuse is that it can reasonably expected to result in physical harm. There doesn't have to be any intent. Intent comes when it comes to law enforcement. Those are the reasons that law enforcement will arrest somebody, cite somebody, whatever else, if they feel there's intent. In our area, it just has to happen. If you know that it has happened, you've witnessed it, whatever else, then we're looking at physical abuse. Also, we're looking at physical harm. What they mean by physical harm is any injury, illness, or other physiological impairment regardless of its gravity or duration. One thing to also remember, please, 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 is if somebody comes up to you and says that they were hit, let's just say hit, please do not ask them any detail, because when you ask leading questions, it's going to probably put ideas into their head that they might not actually have been there before. And they may tell you a different story than actually what truly happened. So what you want to do when you're writing any kind of incident report is just write down what was told to you, and then please refrain from asking any kind of questions. Again, though, if you have witnessed it or you know firsthand what had happened, then please make sure that you're putting that detail into the incident report as well. Sexual abuse, there is no changes. Unlawful sexual contact, touching of the erogenous zone, breast, buttocks, private parts. And again, please, please don't ask any kind of questions. Sexual abuse and physical abuse are probably going to be two good examples that law enforcement or children's services are probably involved with. One thing with sexual abuse too that we try to make sure that can happen is to get the individual to the emergency room, especially if they're saying that they were raped, because we want to try to get that evidence. But again, we can't force anybody. It's their decision or their guardian's decision to do that. And sometimes they choose not to do that because a SANE exam is a very, very invasive exam, and it could be more traumatizing to that person than what actually has already happened to them. So just kind of keep that in mind. Verbal abuse, we see a lot of incident reports where maybe a staff has cussed or done something like that. Not saying that it's right, it's very inappropriate, but unless there's like a threat, coercion, intimidation, harassment, or humiliation to that individual, it's probably not going to rise to the level of us being filing it as an MUI. So to just be handled internally as a UI investigation. But again, you have to remember even when it's a UI investigation, they still have to come up with what happened, identify the causes and contributing factors, and come up with that prevention plan. Misappropriation. One thing to always remember with misappropriation, there is no amount when it comes to misappropriation when somebody's stealing from an individual. When it's a peer, when it's a staff, an outside person, a family member, whatever else, there is no amount. It can be a penny that they steal from somebody and be filed as misappropriation, okay? So we always remember that. The dollar amount comes when we're talking about peer-to-peer stuff. One thing that we always have to stress too with misappropriation is we really want to make sure that there was actually something that was stolen or something actually happened. A lot of times, probably not now, but there was times where SSAs might go in and do financial reviews, those types of things. And maybe the staff person had just left and had taken some money. They hadn't brought the change back, the receipt back, or whatever else. So when they're counting this money, it's not going to be accurate. It's not going to be what's supposedly in there. So we always want to make sure that they go back through, add, subtract, do whatever, check with staff. Hey, did you maybe just forget to put this change back in there before we say something has actually been stolen? One thing too that I can't stress enough that we've seen a lot is, I know not everybody does them, but I know licensed homes, things like that. And maybe you guys do them, but inventories. Inventories is huge, and we've found that we've done actually a couple investigations because there's been something that's been placed on somebody's inventory and then it's come up missing. Maybe not stolen, maybe it was thrown away, maybe it broke, whatever else. But because there's no documentation, nobody remembers what happened, it's just now gone, so we have to assume that it was stolen. So one thing I want to stress, if you guys do keep inventories, please make sure that they're accurate. Make sure that you're putting the date of when they purchased it. If they did decide to throw it away, put that date in there that they threw it away, or if it broke, put that stuff in there, because that documentation could possibly save us from having to do a misappropriation MUI. Courtney, do you have any kind of?
No, I think that's just super important. And also some things to consider with the inventory is with that documentation, making sure that you know who is adding or reviewing that documentation. It's really important that as an independent provider, it's typically you. If you're working in a smaller agency, there may be multiple people. So just making sure that you know who is reviewing that documentation and what your process is for that.
Neglect. If you guys have been in the field for any amount of time, you know that neglect, when this rule changed back in 2019, that this definition changed extremely, I just lost my train of thought, but this definition changed drastically. There we go. So basically, I kind of want to go over this one just a little bit, but with neglect, we all have a duty to make sure that we're providing care for individuals. So basically what we're looking at for neglect in this case is failing to provide that medical care, personal care, or other supports that consequently results in serious injury or places an individual or another person at risk of serious injury. And when you're looking at serious injury, we're looking at that it's an injury that was treated by a physician, physician assistant, or nurse practitioner, okay? Before, the definition of neglect was very, very broad. So there was a lot of things that fell into neglect that they definitely wanted to make sure that that it was looked at, but maybe not to the level of neglect, okay? So they did create a new category, which is a UI category that we'll talk about a little bit later, but that's where the program implementation kind of came in. So we'll talk about that too. But again, you have to remember that that is a UI, not an MUI, when it's a program implementation. This hasn't changed. There's always been two types of neglect. It just wasn't really clearly identified in the old rule. But basically what we look at when we look at neglect is it's very possible that there is just one person that was involved, and that's why that neglect happened. So I'm going to pick on Courtney since she's the only person that I have here with me. So if Courtney is the staff person and she neglects to provide my supervision or whatever else, and something seriously happens to me, when we go to do that investigation, we're going to put her as the primary person involved, or the PPI. She is the reason that that neglect kind of happened. The other one is what we call a systems issue. And I kind of talk about this as a domino effect. So you have A, B, C, and D is supposed to be in place, but because B and D wasn't in place, this neglect kind of happened. So it's not really anybody's fault. It's because these multiple things weren't done, and that neglect then happened. So that we would consider that a systems issue. And also one thing to remember too is there could be multiple PPIs as well. If there's an individual has said, if you do a verbal abuse and they say that Nicole and Courtney are both the ones that are doing this, we would list both of them as the PPIs when we're looking at the investigation. Exploitation, no changes. Basically, unlawful or improper act of using a person's resources for your own personal benefit, profit, or gain. Probably we see this mostly with family members. It does happen with staff, but especially when it's with family, it's very, very hard to prove. Okay, we're going to get into the peer-to-peer stuff. One thing also to remember when you're looking at peer-to-peer is that you're going to need to make sure that you're doing incident reports for all of the peers that are involved. And you still want to make sure that you're doing and keeping that confidentiality. So you don't want to use any other peers' names when you're writing my report. And to be honest, it's even better not to even use initials, because if you have an individual that's been at a day program and they've been there ever since day one or whatever else, usually the guardian, anybody that reads that incident report is probably going to be able to determine who was involved when you put those initials on there. So you just want to say maybe another individual, a peer, that type of thing. Same thing with roommates. You just want to maybe say housemate, roommate, however else you want to put that. And basically we're going to be able to link them up because we're going to be getting all those incident reports. And also too, there's not ever, when you're looking at peer-to-peer incidences, when we look at the causes and contributing factors as prevention plans, they're going to be listed out for each person or persons that were involved, because all of those individuals are receiving services. So we want to make sure that they all have been identified, the causes and contributing factors, and then prevention plan to help each one of them. The person that maybe was the one that got stolen from or hit, and the person that did that stuff. So we want to make sure that we're looking at making a prevention plan and causes and contributing factors for both. Here's where I talked about the dollar amount. So when you're talking about peer-to-peer theft, it's $20 or more of money or property, or if that whatever was stolen has a significant value to that person. One thing also to remember when you're talking about peer-to-peer thefts, because it has happened, where a roommate might have gotten caught stealing another roommate's cell phone, iPad, money, and they return it. Even though they returned it, it still has to be filed, because the only reason that they did return it is because they got caught. So we still want to make sure that we file that as an MUI, and the team comes up with those causes and contributing factors and the prevention plan. Okay, peer-to-peer physical acts. As you guys know, this is probably one that the definition of peer-to-peer physical acts has changed numerous times ever since they came up with peer-to-peer acts in the MUI rule definition. So basically one thing to remember is it's going to have to meet one of those 3 bullet points in order for it to be filed as a peer-to-peer physical act, okay? So of course there's going to be a physical altercation, and it's going to, because of that physical altercation, somebody has to be examined by or receive treatment by a physician, physician assistant, or nurse practitioner. If whatever happened to one of those individuals involved them being choked or strangled, a bloody nose, a bloody lip, a black eye, concussion, or biting that causes breaking of the skin, or if, say, neither one of those first 2 bullet points happened, but the individual that maybe was victimized or assaulted, whatever, once the police called, the police come and they say, yes, we're definitely going to not arrest Courtney, but we're going to issue her a citation for what she did to Nicole, then we have to go ahead and file it as a peer-to-peer act, okay? So even though maybe Courtney or myself, she didn't give me a black eye, she didn't give me a bloody lip, anything like that, but the police did come and say, hey, yeah, what you did, it broke the law, so we're giving you this citation, then we would have to file that as a peer-to-peer act, okay? Also too, one thing to remember is that sometimes you might have a peer-to-peer altercation and a black eye doesn't always happen immediately. So if you had an altercation between 2 peers and the next day I wake up with a black eye and you know that Courtney did hit me in the face or punch me in the face, at that point is when you would then say, hey, we had this, we thought it was just going to be a UI, but now Nicole woke up with a black eye, so we have to file it. We have to get that to the county and they'll have to file it as a peer-to-peer and we'll have to do an MUI investigation. Peer-to-peer verbal, again, it's the use of words, gestures, communicative means that could threaten, coerce, or intimidate the person, the other peer. And this is the big thing is when they have the opportunity or the ability to carry out the threat, okay? Prior to COVID, we had a lot of times where individuals would get mad at each other at work one day and then be best friends the next day, maybe say, hey, I hate you, I'm gonna beat you up, whatever else. But you know that there wasn't the opportunity or the ability for them to carry out that threat, or you know that they wouldn't have carried out that threat. It's still something that needs to be documented and written up on an incident report, but wouldn't be something that we would file as an MUI. Peer-to-peer sexual, again, it's an act by a peer to another peer for sexual conduct or contact for the purpose of sexual gratifications without consent. Prohibited sexual relations, basically in a nutshell, any DD employee is prohibited to have any kind of relationships with the individuals that we serve. And I know I usually get a lot of funny looks from people when we talk about this category because they're thinking, how can that ever happen? But it does, and probably within 2020 wasn't bad, and I don't think 2019 was, but probably like 2018, 2017, I probably filed more prohibited sexual relations than I have in the whole time that I've been doing investigations, and that's been for going on 19 years now. So, and again, we don't look at it as abuse because we look at it that the individual is consenting, that it's a relationship that they want to be in, but it's not an appropriate relationship when that person is like a staff person or has authority above that person. Rights code violation, basically it's an infringement on that individual's rights, and it has to create a risk to that person's health and welfare before we file it as a rights code. There are many incident reports that we see that that state at the level of a UI rights code violation. They still have to be addressed. You still have to come up with causes and contributing factors, prevention plans and stuff, but it's not going to be something that we would file as an MUI. Failure to report. I usually start out my presentation as saying that we're all mandated reporters, and we all are. So you want to make sure that if you have knowledge of something, you suspect something, you need to make sure that you report that, because you can get in just as much trouble by not reporting abuse, neglect, misappropriation of a person with a developmental disability as that person that's doing whatever to them, okay? It can be criminal. Sometimes too, your reporting might not necessarily be immediately to the county board. Maybe it's something that's very serious that you could just go ahead and call the police. Do that, because then you've reported, but you also want to make sure that you follow up with the county board with an incident report and stuff saying, hey, I did report this and this is who I reported it to. This is why, you know, give them those details. Unapproved behavioral support, a lot of words up there, a lot of bullet points, but basically with unapproved behavioral supports, I know they sound very negative, but if they're used appropriately, it's going to be used to ensure the health and welfare of an individual or other individuals, because that person may be getting aggressive, may try to harm somebody, may try to harm themselves, okay? So if you use an unapproved behavioral support and that person doesn't have anything in their plan that addresses being able to use like a hands down, an escort, that type of thing, but you use it because you were ensuring that person's health and welfare, you just want to write up an incident report. We'll still have to do an investigation and just come up with a prevention plan to say, hey, how can we avoid this from happening in the future? Or is this something maybe that this person needs more supports and we have to add these things into their plan because they're just having a really bad time? So again, it's not something bad if you use it correctly. The second bullet point talks about prone restraints. And in Ohio, they are illegal. Prone restraint is when you put somebody face down. Prior to 2019, we didn't even, if somebody did a prone restraint, we didn't even file it as an unapproved behavioral support. It was automatically physical abuse. But in this case, we do look at it first to see if, maybe it was something that was truly necessary, whatever else. And it was just only done for behavioral purposes. And I think the reason, they never said why they changed this, but my thought is that I used to work direct care many moons ago. But, you do have individuals that do sometimes put themselves on the ground. Maybe they do put themselves, lay down flat on their stomach or whatever else, and then they start to hit their hands on the ground. They start to beat their head on the ground. They start to kick the ground or whatever else. And you need to kind of control that to make sure that they're not hurting themselves. If you're doing that for that purpose, then I would say using that prone restraint would be appropriate. If you yourself just put somebody, slam them on the ground and start holding them, then we would probably be looking at physical abuse. You do also have unapproved behavioral supports that don't rise to the level of an MUI, where there is no risk to that person's health and welfare. So again, they would just be like an unusual incident, and it would be investigated at that level, the provider level.
Yeah, I think unapproved behavior support is something that a lot of providers and people that are providing the services become very intimidated about. And I think it's important to remember that health and safety is part of that, and that sometimes, an unapproved behavior support, as Nicole said, is used in an appropriate manner to maintain health and safety risk. If someone is running out in front of a semi truck and you are forced to physically intervene, an unapproved behavior support would be filed, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a negative thing. So I just think that there is some type of reputation around this one, that sometimes we do file it and we go through the investigation process, but it is deemed as appropriate. So we just want to make sure that that's really clear, and it is not a scary thing. We just go through this investigation process.
And like I said, like we said earlier, if you do it for the right reasons, it's not that you did anything wrong. So we just want to make sure that, because I know I've been in the field for many years and everybody's like, well, I can't touch anybody. I'll get in trouble. I'll do this. And really, the bad thing is if you don't do an unapproved behavioral support to ensure somebody's health and welfare, you're going to be in a lot more trouble if you don't do it than if you did. Because if you don't do something and they get seriously hurt, you'd be looking at neglect. So just kind of keep that in mind. Missing individual, basically, when we look at missing individuals, we always make sure that we're not looking at something that could have been neglect. But basically what you look at is if after you've looked everywhere, the person can't be found, and that last bullet point is the important one. If that person being missing poses a risk to that person or poses imminent risk to others, then it would be a missing individual. If an individual, has 24/7 staff, but maybe they wanted to go to their friend's house, whatever else, there isn't any risk to that person. They have pedestrian safety skills. They know everything. They're not at a risk to hurt anybody else. We wouldn't file that as an MUI. What we would be looking at is if by that person not having staff with them, they pose a risk because maybe they're inappropriate in community around women, children, those types of things. Also, too, if you call law enforcement to help with any kind of search, it doesn't automatically rise it to the level of an MUI. What makes it an MUI in this case is that last bullet point, because it all talks about the individual. the risk of that individual or the risk of others because that individual doesn't have staff. Attempted suicide, there actually has to be an actual physical attempt, okay? You know, we have individuals that get mad and say, I'm gonna kill myself, I don't wanna live anymore, whatever else. Not that you ignore it, please don't ever do that. You still wanna take them very, very seriously and make sure that you're providing supervision if need be, but wouldn't be necessarily filed as an MUI if they're just saying that they're gonna do it. But if they actually do make a physical attempt and it results in ER treatment, inpatient observation, or hospital admission, we would have to file it as an attempted suicide. An attempted suicide is no matter what. They do not have to be with a provider. They can be with family. They can be by themselves. If we know that they did it, when we have that knowledge of knowing, you need to make sure that you're communicating that with the county board, and then we would file it at that time. Law enforcement, again, they don't have to be with a provider. They don't have to be with anything. When you have knowledge, if you find out that somebody got charged, incarcerated, arrested, or tased, we would file that as a law enforcement MUI. Medical emergency, basically you're looking at any intervention that's done to save a person's life. So you could be looking at choking relief, back blows, abdominal thrust, CPR, using an AED, an EpiPen. One thing that we did learn, and Courtney can kind of talk about this too, the EpiPen is a medical emergency if the staff are the one to have to administer it, okay? If the individual can administer it themselves and they do administer it themselves, we would not have to file that as a medical emergency. We learned that last year, correct, Courtney?
Correct. Yeah, you just want to make sure that that's identified in, you know, if they have a self-med assessment, you just want to make sure that that would be identified in the self-med assessment, that they typically, they're able to administer their own emergency medication. And yeah, we did. We learn as we go as well.
Significant injuries. Significant injuries can be known or unknown. We can know how they happen. We might not know how they happen. Hopefully the investigation might determine how it did happen. Maybe it was started out as an unknown and we did figure out what happened. But there are times that we don't ever figure out really what happened or how they hurt themselves. Just like any of us, you know, you wake up, you're getting a shower, and you see a bruise all of a sudden on your leg and have no idea how you got that. Same way with the individuals. Unfortunately, we can maybe kind of guess, oh yeah, I remember I hit the table, but we also have individuals that don't communicate well. They may not remember. They may not be able to tell us how they got that specific injury, okay? But when you look at significant injuries, it's gonna be something that results in a concussion, broken bones, dislocation, second or third degree burns, requires immobilizations or casting, or 5 or more sutures. One thing to also remember is sometimes concussions are not always diagnosed, okay? Say a person may have fallen, they did hit their head, you know, you took them to the emergency room because you wanted to make sure that they were okay, they got a CAT scan, everything was fine. They didn't get that diagnosis of a concussion, but then maybe a couple of days later, they start complaining of headaches, maybe they start vomiting, that type of thing. You take them back to the emergency room, and then that's when they were diagnosed with the concussion. That's when we need to know, and that's when we'll file it. So don't ever panic that you didn't report something right away, because when you first took them, like maybe 2 days ago, they didn't have that diagnosis. It was that 2 days afterwards that they did. But you still want to make sure that you send in that initial incident report to tell us how they fell or how they got that concussion. Because you'll probably be writing another incident report saying, hey, I had to take Nicole to the emergency room because she was vomiting, complaining of headache. She did have a fall on whatever day, I believe that's what it was from. But again, send us all that documentation so that we can have that for our report. Unanticipated hospitalizations. Basically, anytime a person is hospitalized and it's not addressed in their plan, we're gonna file it. And then also too, and I don't want this to be confused, people to get confused, because this was in the old rule, like if they were in the hospital over 24 hours, it'd be filed, but if they were in there less than 24 hours, we didn't. That isn't what this is talking about. So basically kind of what happens is there are times that people might be taken to the emergency room, and because maybe the hospital is overcrowded, there's no beds, anything like that, they pretty much kind of keep and stay their whole time in the emergency room. But that time in the emergency room exceeded over 24 hours. If that is the case, then we would go ahead and file that, because basically kind of what they're looking at is if they were in the hospital for that long, whether they had that specific admission they still got medical care. You know, they had testing done, they probably had blood work done. They were getting some kind of care while they were in the emergency room. So we would file it at that point in time.
Also with this one, I think it's important to know that we do kind of follow along after the initial filing. So if you are someone that is taking them to follow-up appointments, we definitely want any of that documentation as well. So, you know, if you're the one that's going to take them after they were released for a follow-up appointment, that is something that you would want to share with the investigator, and just make sure that we have all of that follow-up documentation.
And then also too, this is another one where we always request the discharge paperwork from the hospitalization, but we've gone through a couple of accreditations over the past year. And basically some of the paperwork that we get from discharges aren't very specific, aren't very detailed. So we are now requesting more information from the hospitals. So that might be something that the county may reach out to you guys to assist with, getting signatures from guardians or whatever else to get a consent to get that information. Basically what we want to make sure that's on the discharge paperwork, it gives a clear, concise diagnosis of what they were hospitalized for. And sometimes some of the discharge paperwork, I don't know if you guys look at it very closely, they don't do that. I can tell you right now in 2020, most of the discharge paperwork all talked about COVID, whether the person had COVID or not. And it's probably still going to continue that way. But that might be something that we're reaching out to make sure that we get. So sometimes too, hospitalization MUIs may stay open longer than what they normally did because we're kind of waiting on that information so that we can complete our report. Also, I want to stress to you as well that an individual doesn't have to sign a release either. If they don't want us to get any more medical paperwork on them, or a guardian does not, they do not have to be they don't have to sign that consent. We just need to know that they didn't want us to get that, and we can just note that, and we'll complete our report with the information that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the unanticipated hospitalization, it's just important to realize as staff, staff tend to know the people served a lot, and they are able to gather that information. So any of that information that you can share with us, we can certainly include, and we would like to see. A lot of times when staff are taking people to appointments, they are asking for those types of things. And if you know that someone was recently hospitalized for, let's say, a UTI, if they have a follow-up appointment, asking about, you know, is there anything additional for that UTI, and those types of things is super important. That way we can see, do they feel like they're back to baseline and there's no more concern, or do they still have some additional concerns that maybe could result in additional appointments? So it's just important. We recognize that staff really know that person a lot, and a lot of times that is very helpful to us to be able to gather that information. So.
And also too, probably not so much for independents, because you're probably the one that's always taking that person to the hospital. But for small agency, I know that there's times that a staff person that really knows, you know, if I know Courtney really well, I'm supposed to take her to the doctor for the follow-up, and I know there's a lot of questions that need to be asked. I get pulled away, or, you know, couldn't make it, and you have somebody else that steps in. If that's going to be the case, please make sure that that person takes the information that they need. Have a list of the questions that you wanted to ask the doctor that person can follow up with. Because I know it's going to be very strange for that person, especially if they don't know the person. But we know that they still have to get to the doctor. So you want to kind of make sure that you have that kind of planned out. You know, even if it's the person that knows them very well that's going to take them, might not be a bad idea for them to already have the questions written out, what they want to ask the doctor, what they want to address with the doctor, those types of things, just so that they're not forgetting anything either. You have to go back. We didn't do death yet. Oh. We were still doing the hospitalization stuff. There we go. Okay, so basically death, anytime a person passes away, we do have to file an MUI. Depending on the circumstances of how they passed away, it'll depend on what information that we have to gather to submit to the department. Okay, so reporting requirements. Anytime a person resides in an ICF or receives 24-hour waiver services, regardless of where they were, who they were with, we have to file an MUI. So if a person typically has a 24-hour waiver, but they maybe go home with a family member or something like that and get hospitalized, we would still have to file that MUI once we have knowledge of it. okay? One thing also to remember is we're under timelines. So you wanna make sure that when you report something to the county board, you get the incident report to them as quickly as you can. We can file with a verbal notification, but you'd be surprised that how sometimes the verbal notification and what's written on the incident report can be very, very different, okay? So, and a verbal notification is what starts the clock, or even an email starts the clock. So if you guys email an SSA, you make a phone call to the on-call, whatever else, that's gonna start our timeline of the MUI needing to be filed by 5 p.m. the next day of that we find out about it. Again, per the rule, you still have by 3 o'clock the following day to write, to submit the written incident report. And that's for anybody, agency as well as independents. And like, I don't want people to hate me. So if an agency has told you other timelines, then, you know, follow what they ask you to do. I'm just telling you what's in the rule, so. There's also reporting requirements about immediate to 4 hour. Whenever there is, sorry, I have a hair in front of my face. So you want to always remember, whenever there is an allegation, suspicion of any of these accidental, suspicious death, exploitation, misappropriation, neglect, your peer-to-peer acts. Remember that one is one that people kind of forget. So if you're not sure if a peer-to-peer act is an MUI, you want to make sure that you're getting that information to the county board so they can determine whether or not. So you have that immediate to 4 hours done. Your physical, sexual, verbal abuse, prohibited sexual relations, and median inquiries. And you want to make sure too, I would do it immediate and not wait till that 4 hours is up, because really the reason that this was put into place is to ensure health and welfare of the individual. Because if they're saying that they're being abused at home or whatever else, they've come into work where they're safe, we don't want to make sure that we don't want to send them back to the home where they could actually be getting hurt again.
If you're ever questioning this, just report. We are able to rule through whether or not they are an MUI, whether or not they are in that 4 hour window. I think Nicole and I are both happier to get incidents than to find out about them later. We want to make sure that we're doing health and safety for the people that we serve. So if all else fails, report it, and then we can go through the process from there. But make sure that, you know, as quickly as possible. And also, as a provider, you want to make sure that you're reporting as close to the incident as possible, because then you're remembering and that information is fresh to you. So if you need to be, you know, relieved to do those things, make sure you're communicating that so that you can get those reports written, because it does help to write them very quickly after the incident so that you can remember all of the detail. That really does help through the process.
Also reporting requirements, anytime law enforcement has to be notified, it is in the rule that it's the responsibility of the provider to do that. Basically, when you're talking about any kind of notifications, you want to make sure that you're documenting that. When you document it, you want to document the time, date, who you notified, and you want to make sure that you're writing that on the incident report, because you would be surprised at all the incident reports that we see that have nothing on there. I know people were called because otherwise we wouldn't be having an incident report in front of us, but you definitely want to make sure that you're documenting that on the incident report, because when you ever have anybody that comes in to look at that information, if it's not written in black and white, they're going to assume that you didn't do it and you could get cited. Those people that have to be notified are the guardian or the person who the individual has identified, the SSA. I'm going to skip the next bullet point, the staff or family that are living at the home. And this is new to the rule. So you're also wanting to make sure that you're notifying other providers of services necessary to ensure continuity of care, okay? Doesn't mean that you have to, if Courtney has a day program, something happens at home, I don't have to notify that day program every time. But if it's something that they need to know to ensure Courtney's still getting that care or whatever else that needs to be provided, then you want to make sure that you're notifying them. And again, documenting, and has to be done the same day. And for some reason, if you can't notify somebody, document that as well.
And it's important in the continuity of care. If I would have punched Nicole in the face in the morning and she's going off to day programming and we're going to be in the same area, those types of things are super important to know as well, so that all service providers are on the same page. And I'll try not to punch you anymore, Nicole, okay?
Okay. Also falls, you know, if somebody fell, They got up, they said that they were fine, and, you know, they wanted to go to work because they want to make that paycheck. You know, make sure that you're calling them, because then all of a sudden, if I'm all of a sudden complaining that my knee hurts or something like that, then that provider is going to know that something actually did happen with me earlier in the day, and they're going to make sure that I get that care right away. Oh, sorry, you just did the slide. I'm like zoning here. It's also a requirement that any agency provider has to have an internal procedure for the review of MUIs, what steps they're going to take to prevent reoccurrence of MUIs. And in that procedure, they have to identify who their senior management is. So, and the reason why is if there is an MUI involving misappropriation, neglect, physical abuse, or sexual abuse, that senior management has to be notified within 2 working days of them knowing of the MUI, of that MUI being filed. And please, please don't get that confused with notifying people immediately. This is only for those senior management. And the reason that is a lot of times when you have MUIs involving misappropriation, neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, you've got stuff happening with staff where they might be placed on leave, those types of things. And those senior management are probably the ones that are going to be handling that kind of administrative level type stuff. Okay, also too, whenever there is an MUI filed for physical or sexual abuse, typically law enforcement is going to be, Children's Services or law enforcement is probably going to be the agency that is doing the investigation. But so within 14 days, we're going to try to give you guys a preliminary findings. If law enforcement or Children's Services are involved, we're not going to be able to do that within that 14 days, but we're still going to kind of reach out to you once we get that information to us. But if we are working on it, if they have declined to do it and we're the ones that are doing that, within 14 days, we're going to provide information to the individual's guardian, the provider, and we typically always include the SSA too, because it's a team member, in regards to whether we're going to substantiate or unsubstantiate. That way it gives the provider the information that they need to know of what they're going to maybe possibly do with that staff in the future, whether they're going to look at retraining, termination, those types of things. If we can't come up with that information within that 14 days, because there's sometimes where we can't get people interviewed right away, they cancel on us, all that type of stuff, we'll still kind of keep you in the loop of what's going on with that investigation. For peer-to-peer acts, notifications have to be made for each individual. So if they have guardians, they both have to be notified. One thing that you have to remember though is when you're making those notifications to keep confidentiality. You can't say, Nicole got mad and she hit Courtney, she's the one that did it. You have to keep that confidentiality, even though I know that they're gonna ask you, and they'll just say, okay, well, if you don't tell me, I'll just ask Courtney when she comes home. That's fine if they ask Courtney when she comes home. Courtney doesn't have to keep confidentiality. You guys as providers, independents, you have to. For some reason you can't make a notification, you wanna make sure that you identify that as well. You wanna talk for a little bit, Courtney?
Yeah, sure. So we'll talk a little bit about unusual incidents. So unusual incidents are resulting in, they're not limited to, but dental injuries, falls, injuries, medication errors, relocation, and I do want to add with medication errors without a likely risk. That's important because we have ran into that a few times. Peer-to-peer acts that do not result in an MUI, rights code violation, unapproved behavior support that does not pose a likely risk, and emergency room or urgent care treatment that is once again not when you're admitted. Program implementation incidents. So those all remain unusual incidents. As Nicole mentioned earlier, they're still super important to have a process for those. And just because it does not rise to the level of an MUI, there is still a process that you want to make sure that you are reporting these unusual incidents and that you are looking for those trends. What to do when an unusual incident occurs. Ensure immediate action, obtain medical attention immediately if necessary, separate individuals or staff, assess for injuries, call for assistance, ensure notifications have been made. You still want to make those notifications with the UI, with the guardian or family or staff at home. And these notifications have to be made on the same day. So they don't have the same reporting requirements, but as we said before, if you're questioning whether it could be a UI or MUI, just make those notifications. What to do in an unusual incident? According to the MUI rule, all agency providers are required to investigate every UIR. So this is where Nicole was mentioning earlier that you still want to make sure that you're going through that process. If there's an attempt, someone saying, hey, I'm thinking about killing myself, and you're going to document that as an unusual incident. While that was not an attempt, so it's not going to be an actual MUI, it is still important to figure out exactly what occurred, determine those causes and contributing factors, and develop a prevention plan. This is a requirement. This is an important part. Through the MUI process, we do send out the causes and contributing factors. If it is a UI, it is the responsibility of the provider to investigate this, develop that prevention plan, and make sure that you have identified those causes and contributing factors. A good incident report will include who, what, where, and when. Making sure that you're objective. You don't want a ton of opinions, stick to facts. I talked a little bit about earlier that you really want to make sure that you're writing it close to when the incident occurred as possible, because that's when you're going to get the most detail. You're going to remember all of those things. It is super important to be specific. If it happened, if someone had a fall and there was an uneven curb, you want to make sure you're identifying that. You want to say what time of day, any type of detail that you could include that could help paint the picture of what exactly happened in that incident. You're going to identify that people that may have witnessed the incident. That's super important. If Nicole saw me fall over the ledge, that's important to identify that Nicole watched that happen, because she may be able to give some information additionally if needed to say, hey, I noticed that the curb was uneven. That's why Courtney fell. So it is very important to identify the people that are around there, including the people that were affected by the incident, and just really describing the best that you can as to who, what, where, and when. Name all of the relevant people. Like I said, you want to make sure if Nicole witnessed it, she would be a relevant person that you would want to include in there. All of the people involved, witnesses. When writing down witnesses, make sure that they actually saw the incident. Do not write them down just because they were in the area. That happens a lot, where you'll say, this happened at day programming, and Nicole will go, I was over here in the restroom with someone, I had no idea what happened. They would not be identified in that report if they did not see that happen. So make sure that you are doing a little bit of legwork to determine that. If an individual witnessed an incident, you can verbally let someone know that you do not want to include their name on another individual's report. When, exact time of the incident, exact date of the incident. We get reports a lot that maybe don't include the time or all of that information. That is part of your report. And make sure that you always include AM and PM. Sometimes we're guessing on that, and we shouldn't. That should be included in your report. Make sure you're including that exact location. So Ann's area at Happy Industries. Hey, I'm gonna go to Happy Industries, but employee restroom, wherever these things are happening, make sure that you're really putting the detail in that. Don't just say it happened at Courtney's house. Did it happen at Courtney's house in her bedroom? Did it happen at Courtney's house in the living room? Was there uneven carpet? Was there something that could have contributed to that? So having the location of where that happened really helps. Also, Nicole can attest, sometimes we get incidents where the location matters because maybe you couldn't see the full incident because you were in a room that was across the way. Maybe there's a wall that blocks visual. Maybe there isn't. Maybe it's a very clear view. So it's important to know where those incidents happened.
And the reason too is because when you come up with causes and contributing factors, somebody falling in a bathroom because they might have just gotten out of the shower and the floor was wet is a lot different than them falling in the living room on a carpeted floor. You know, you have those causes and contributing factors that probably the reason that she fell in the shower or in the bathroom is probably because the floor was wet. She slipped. You know, her falling in the living room on the carpet isn't going to be because probably the floor was wet. It could be some other reason. So the location is very, very important. Same way, even if they fall out in the community, you know, where they fell. Was it in Walmart? Well, where was it in Walmart? Was it in the parking lot? Was it in the store? Again, was it in the restroom? All that stuff is very, very important to know. And again, the reason being is because when you're coming up with a prevention plan, a fall and where it happened is really going to result in a good prevention plan to keep that from happening again.
And you can also include elements. If it was wet out, if there was snow, those types of things are super important as well. Because if it was a fluke and I fell on ice, that would be a great thing to identify. If it was, hey, there is an area that the gutter leaks, that could be something that you could potentially get repaired and keep the water from leaking there to make ice. So it's super important that you are including all of those things. In the what happened, once again, detail is important, but making sure that you're objective. What happened during the incident, if staff were involved, describe exactly what the staff did. Describe what that intervention is. Sometimes that intervention will determine whether or not it is an MUI or not as well. If you had to do some type of intervention because someone was choking, make sure to describe exactly what that intervention was. If you did not have to do an intervention and that person was able to clear on their own, you would want to also identify that. So that really does make the difference on how a staff intervened in that incident. Describe in order what happened. So make sure you're kind of painting a timeline of what happened during that incident. So if it started with, I came in today and I was already upset because I didn't bring my lunch. And then I came into my day programming and Nicole happened to be there and I punched her in the face. I'm going to want to make sure to describe what happened leading up to that as well. Paint that timeline in the events and in the order that they occurred. When describing immediate actions, make sure you're describing what you did for the individual. And that is where you're really going to talk about providing first aid, assisted them up, checked for injuries, verbally talked with them. All of those things are super important to include in there. And an incident report is a legal document. You want to make sure, once again, that you're not putting in a ton of opinion. Keep it very factual, but also keep it very detailed. If you're looking back on an incident that happened a month ago, you're probably not going to remember those things. So as much detail as possible at the beginning is best.
And remember to only put in there what you know or what you were told. I mean, yes. You don't want to guess. If you know Courtney was upset because you were told by her home provider or whatever else, then you can document that information because you had that information given to you. But don't guess as to what happened or why something happened. You want to just stick to the facts of what you know.
And you can also put in an incident report if the home provider told you something. You could say, the home provider notified me that this occurred. So you don't necessarily have to know that that is the contributing factor, but you can still identify that that was told to you as a potential contributing factor. So it's important to identify those, but you can put right in there where you learned that information also, and that's helpful. A program implementation incident means an unusual incident involving the failure to carry out a person-centered plan, such as failure causes minimal risk or no risk. There is no risk to the individual or very little risk to the individual. Examples include, but are not limited to, failing to provide supervision for short periods of time, automobile accidents without harm, and self-reported incidents with minimal risk. So if you are not providing a service for someone, but that person is able to, let's say staff was 10 minutes late to the home, but that person had no risk during that time. That person does have independent time. There was no risk to that person, but there was no staff during that period. That would be a program implementation incident, but there was no risk to that individual because nothing was likely to happen that could cause risk during that period of time. We do get a lot of questions on automobile accidents. So an automobile accident without harm would be considered the program implementation incident as well.
Typically with the automobile accidents is that prior to 2019, if an individual or a staff person it's January, just so you know, so it can get icy. If a person, say, was slowing down, they were coming to a red light, whatever else, maybe hit a patch of black ice, and actually then hit the person in front of them, in Ohio, they're automatically going to be cited for failure to ensure a clear distance. With the old rule, we would file that automatically as neglect because they were cited. With this rule, again, if they were slowing down, they were hardly even, maybe going 5 miles an hour or whatever else, but they did hit that person, there was no injury to anybody, the individual was fine, then it would fall under this program implementation. So basically what they said, no matter what, if you were in an automobile accident, no matter what the circumstances, it was automatically filed as neglect. Now we would look at the circumstances, see if anybody was hurt, what was the surroundings of it, why it would happen, before we would say, yes, it was an MUI for neglect, or no, it falls into that program implementation.
So who must report? All DD employees, which include an employee of the department, superintendent, board member, employee of a county board, administrator board. Well, you can read through. Basically, anyone is a mandated reporter, so you must report. You have to report an incident if you're aware of it. Even if you find out later that the incident occurred, you are considered a mandated reporter. Anybody that is, as an independent provider or small agency, you are what we call a mandated reporter. We do get a lot, oh, well, I didn't know I had to report that. Even if you find out when you are not working, sometimes we get that question, Nicole and I will see, oh, well, I found out about that, but I wasn't working there anymore. Or I was at home and she texted me, so I wasn't on the clock. You are a mandated reporter regardless if you are currently providing that service. So please know that. What happens when an MUI occurs? Who do you call? The county board during business hours, on call after hours, or call immediately to ensure health and welfare. If you're working for an agency, make sure you know your protocol within your agency on who you would contact during that. It is important to write an incident report as soon as possible, and I think we've talked about that a few times, but I cannot stress that enough. And that the investigative agent and the county board do receive all of that relevant information. You may get calls from Nicole and I if we have additional questions, immediate questions. And like Nicole said, sometimes we just get that initial phone call or email and we don't have the full incident report. And a lot of times that incident report is very helpful to give us some additional details. If I find out someone was admitted to the hospital, but we don't know why. And then the incident report could include they were admitted to the hospital for pneumonia, or they might have some stats in there, some vitals that were taken that are very helpful. So getting that incident report to us is very, very important.
One thing too that I want to stress is if it's during business hours and you're calling about an MUI, do not, and you get somebody's voicemail, do not leave a message. You really want to call back and say, hey, I have an MUI to report, or I think I have an MUI to report. I really need to talk to somebody about this, because it's very possible that that person might have left for a meeting. They're not going to be back. They won't get that voicemail until the next day, or even the following the next day. So you really don't want to leave a message if it's during business hours. If it's after hours, then you probably will leave a message if that person doesn't answer the phone. And then depending on the county, I don't know, they all have their different protocols on how they do things. The more information, the more detail that you have, the better to leave in that message. And then they may call you back if they need more information or whatever else. And you also want to make sure too, in whatever county that you are working in, you do know what that crisis number is for the county boards. And that, and I think some of them have different numbers or whatever else. So you want to make sure it's that SSA on-call crisis, or whoever is on call to report MUIs to that you're calling.
And then measures are taken to ensure the health and welfare. So Nicole touched on this a little bit, but removal of that PPI, or the person that is suspected, you don't want to send someone back to a home if you think that Courtney may have punched them in the face. You want to make sure there is no risk and that risk is removed. So that could be the employee, that could be any type of PPI. You just want to make sure they're not putting themselves, that you're not putting an individual back in risk. An investigation ensues immediately by either the police, as Nicole mentioned, Children's Services, or Nicole or I as an IA. The investigative agent, which is what Nicole and I do, investigative agents are the only people who investigate MUIs. They must be certified through DODD and have extensive training to conduct these investigations. And the Clearwater COG does have 2 IAs, myself, Courtney Key, and Nicole Powell, which is the lead IA for the COG. What happens next? If the police and or Children's Services have declined to investigate, we would begin that investigation. Nicole did mention a lot of times on Category A investigations, law enforcement or Children's Services may be involved. Sometimes they defer to us for the investigation, or sometimes we work dually together on these investigations. If they've decided to just take a report, then we would go ahead and begin that investigation process. We do conduct interviews. We may go to the scene. I know with COVID, things have changed a little bit where we're not heading as much, but Nicole and I still do visits, and we try to do those safely if necessary. We may take photographs just to get an idea. Once again, location is important. Certain things are important. Determine the causes and contributing factors. So Nicole mentioned that we do determine those and that we send those out to the team. And then the team, which would be the provider, the SSA, the guardian, the team comes up with that prevention plan to determine what we could do to keep this from happening again. And that prevention plan is based upon the causes and contributing factors that the investigative agent identifies. And then we submit the findings to the superintendent and DODD. The abuser registry. The abuser registry is a process that DODD utilizes to place people on a registry after they have been named a PPI in a substantiated allegation. So if an allegation was substantiated, there's potential for the abuser registry. A hearing is conducted and a committee determines if the PPI will be placed on the registry. If a PPI is placed on the registry, they cannot work in this field again. After 1 year from the day that your name was placed on the registry, the person may petition to be removed. The process is not automatic. And Nicole, I think you have a little bit more experience with the abuser registry. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
One thing to remember is, so basically when we substantiate a an MUI at the county level is by preponderance of evidence. So it's basically saying that more than likely or not it happened than it didn't happen. In order for your name to get onto the abuser registry, it has to be clear and convincing. So there has to be a lot more evidence that's involved in them saying that, yes, I truly think that this did happen and that person needs to be placed on the registry. One thing to also remember is that, the DD world is very small and there's a lot of people that know people and whatever else. A person can continue to work and be hired by an agency until their name is on that registry. So if you've heard through the grapevine that Nicole Powell is being looked at for the registry, I can't hire her, that is not true. You do have to continue to hire that person if you feel that they can do the job. It's once their name is placed on the registry. And as agency providers, you are required to check the registry to make sure that that person's name isn't on it. But you are not going to be dinged, like if you've hired somebody and then all of a sudden their name gets placed on it, I believe that somehow you'll be notified, because I know that they sometimes notify us. So once their name is then on the registry, then you would not be able to employ them. But if you already have them employed or whatever else, and then their name gets placed on it, you're not going to be in trouble until if you keep them hired after their name is on it, then you might be in some trouble. But
so the Bill of Rights is a document designed to ensure that the rights of individuals with developmental disabilities are not infringed upon. Basically, individuals have the same rights that we do. So we want to make sure that we are upholding the individual Bill of Rights, and we can share that document with you as well. The individual Bill of Rights can have many versions. County boards develop their Bill of Rights based on the Bill of Rights as outlined in the Ohio Revised Code. The Ohio Revised Code contains state laws written by the General Assembly and signed by the governor. The Bill of Rights is enforced by the county board, or depending on the nature of the allegation, can be enforced by law enforcement or the court system. So just making sure that you're upholding the rights of the individuals, and that is enforced by the county board or could potentially be enforced by law enforcement or the court system. The Bill of Rights is relevant because it ensures the individuals are being treated equally and fairly. It ensures that staff and the others are not overstepping their boundaries. It ensures that individuals are safe and protected, and ensures an individual's right to privacy. These are essential in what we do, and the individual does have the same rights to all of these things. So it is super important that we do not overstep our bounds when we are providing a service, and that we are making sure that we are withholding all of those rights, or upholding all of those rights, not withholding. Agency providers and county boards shall ensure that staff employed in direct services positions are trained on the requirements of this rule regarding the identification and reporting of MUIs and UIs prior to direct contact with any individual. So this is super important. This is your annual training, but this training does have to be done before any direct contact with an individual. Therefore, staff employed in the direct service positions shall receive training during each calendar year, which is kind of what we're doing here, which shall include annual training on the requirements of this rule, including the review of health and welfare alerts. And that's what we're getting into, is the health and welfare alerts. So we did update the health and welfare alerts, and they are here. You can see at the bottom of the slide here that there is a link, and if you are providing through an agency, your agency should be providing you with these updates, but the link is available there. These are to be reviewed as well. And I guess we won't ask questions because there's no audience to ask questions to. I will leave this up for a second. This is our contact information, and this does cover the counties in which Nicole and I are currently overseeing. So myself is Huron, Crawford, and Ottawa, and Nicole is currently doing Erie and Morrow. Both of our emails are there, and we are available with questions as well. So if you do watch this and you're going, hey, I have some clarification, I realize you can't interact with us here, feel free to reach out to us at any time.
And also too, I want to add that as of January 1st, Courtney is now considered the MUI contact for Ottawa as well, and I'm the backup. So those of you that maybe had sent stuff to Michelle or maybe called her for things or whatever else, she's no longer in that position. So you'll be dealing with Courtney or myself as also the contact. Nothing has changed, and this is only for Ottawa County. So nothing has changed. You'll still send stuff to the incident report box, and we'll look at it and respond from that box. Or if we can't respond from that box, you'll be maybe getting an email from Courtney or myself. So don't panic. Say, why am I getting stuff from an IA? So don't want you to panic, but that would be the reason why. And again, you know, if you ever have questions or whatever else, please feel free to reach out to us. One thing too I want to stress is that for independent providers, you are required to send in every incident report that you write, okay? Not just MUIs or potential MUIs. That's only for agency providers. The reason being is in agencies, they have a tier where they can look at those reports, making sure that somebody besides who wrote it does an investigation, comes up with causes and contributing factors and all that other stuff. With independents, you don't have that. So basically, you're sending it to the county board because then they're the ones that kind of oversee those kinds of things going on. So I just want to make sure that you guys were understanding that.
And if you ever are questioning, who do I send this to? How do I send this? Nicole and I can at least guide you in the right direction. So even if it is not something that we can email either one of us and we're willing to get you the right information too. And I'm going to stop screen sharing here. And I think Nicole is going to start. So just a second.
Okay, the first thing that I want to put up here is the UI logs. For independent providers, especially for agency providers, everybody is required to do an unusual incident log, and that has to be done every month, has to be reviewed every month. When doing this, you want to fill it out as completely as possible, because kind of what happens now, especially for agency providers, we don't see every incident report that you turn in now. So basically, this is kind of the county board's review of the stuff that you do. So you want to make sure that you have this completed completely. If it's not, then I'm going to say that probably most contacts are going to get a hold of you and say, hey, this isn't done completely. Can you please do this, do that, and resubmit it to me? One thing you always want to remember is that you want to, whoever's reviewing it, sign it, date it, put their title in there. Also, you also want to make sure that you are identifying patterns and trends, checking yes or checking no. Another thing too, if you have ever identified a pattern and trend, it is your responsibility to make sure that you're notifying the SSA so that you guys can look and see how that pattern and trend is going to be looked at, resolved, that type of thing. Again, you want to make sure that you're doing this monthly. Now, the county board will only request it on a quarterly basis, and they kind of have a rotation. The rule states that the county board has to do a representative sampling on a quarterly basis. So pretty much I think every county has their own kind of tracking system on how to do it. Typically, they're probably going to be asking you this stuff for probably 2 times a year. So you'll be submitting 6 months worth of logs, but it'll be like maybe the first quarter, which would be January, February, March. You'd submit those in April, and then you'd maybe be doing the 3rd quarter, okay? So don't panic if they haven't asked you for it, because like I said, they have you on a rotation type thing. If you do send it in though, they do have to review it. So I guess it's entirely up to you, but it makes it easier on the county board if you're only submitting it when they've asked for it. So a blank UI log is available on our website. It's also available on the department website. You want to make sure that your log has everything that's in this log example, that you have to have all of those categories in your log. So you want to make sure that you're doing that. Okay. And again, if you can't find something, please reach out to Courtney or myself. We can always send you a blank log so that you can use it. Okay. Then I also want to talk about analysis. So depending on when you see this, we will be doing analysis as well. This is just an annual report and does say independent providers, but they're pretty much close to the same for both independents as well as agency. Agency, there only has, I think there's a couple extra questions on there that isn't on for an independent one. But what you're looking at is that you have to do 3 years worth of data. So for this year, if you're seeing this before March 1st, you would have submitted 2020's information. So previous year would be 2020, 2 years ago would be 2019, 3 years ago would be 2018. So we're looking at 3 years worth of data. If you were not a provider at that time, you just want to make sure that you note that. Even if you have not had any MUIs for the year, you still have to complete this form. You are just going to document that you had no MUIs. You'll know that you have MUIs because what happens is the contacts send out a blank form like this. They'll send the form to everybody, but then they'll follow up by sending you guys a printout that has been done by us. And it'll give you every MUI that was filed for you as a provider. So each independent will have their own if they have any. Each agency provider will have their own if they had any. And again, it'll give you those things in there that you can mark down. One thing that you want to make sure that you're looking at for this year is because when the rule changed, they changed things when how we document incidents or MUIs and ITS. So there are times where you might have had one MUI number, but you might have had two categories under it. So maybe you had a significant injury, and because of that significant injury, they got hospitalized. So you're going to actually put in there that there was two categories that were done, even though it was one MUI number. Okay. So, so you might have to, so when you're counting them, you don't want to count the MUI numbers, you want to count the categories under each one of those things. And then that's where you're going to get your total number. And it's different. This is going to be new for everybody. This will be actually the first year that we really have kind of done it this way, because it was 2019 when they changed the ITS thing, but I don't think there was a lot of ones that we did in 2019 that had more than multiple categories. This year there are. So this year also too, unfortunately with COVID, you might see where there was a hospitalization and unfortunately a death. So again, there's going to be one MUI number, but it's going to be two categories. So you're going to count the categories, not the MUI numbers. And again, when you're filling this out, if you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to us and we can help you through it. And again, you should be able to have your this year's, last year's, whatever, all of those, you should have that already on a form. If you, for some reason you can't find that information, please again reach out to the contact to us and we can print out those MUI information for you guys if you don't have it. This form, it looks different. There was a form that we used to send out to independents, agency providers, and I kind of want to get rid of using this form or that form. This is one that the state kind of prepared when the MUI rule and stuff changed. So as you can see, it was kind of updated in February of 2020 and it was done for both. So I really kind of want to stick to using this form for both independents and agencies. And again, you can get this form on our website and you can also get it on the department website if you can't have it. But again, you're also going to be getting it from the contact for you to fill out. And again, remember, it is something that you have to do even if you don't have MUIs. Same way with unusual incidents in the logs. Even if you don't have any unusual incidences for a month, you still have to document that for the month of December, whatever it was, there was no unusual incidences. You still have to make sure that you're documenting all that stuff. And I believe that might be the end of this. And again, since we're not together, there isn't any way that we can ask, get any kind of questions from you guys. But if you do have questions after seeing this video, please feel free to reach out to us. You can email us, you can call us, however else. You know, if there's a couple of you that have kind of questions or whatever else, you know, we can always maybe even get together and try to do another Zoom meeting or something like that to kind of help with filling out the analysis logs, whatever you have questions on, your UI investigations or program implementation investigations. If you're not really sure if you're doing a thorough job, you want to make sure that you are. And if you have questions on what you're doing or not doing, again, reach out to us because that's something that will definitely be looked at when provider compliance or licensure comes to do any kind of reviews for you. So thank you, everybody. Hopefully 2021 is a great year. Maybe we'll get to see each other again in person. And again, like I said, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.